Alright, now that we have downloaded and installed the VirtualBox software and you've got the ISO file from the Linux downloaded somewhere, we're going to go ahead and create a virtual machine in VirtualBox. So I'm going to go ahead and click New here, and I'm going to type in a name for this virtual machine that I'm creating. And I will call mine ISQA 8306/4300. I'm going to tell it that I will be putting a Linux operating system on it, and that it will be an Oracle 64-bit version of a Linux operating system. So generally, if I'm going to put, say, database software on a virtual machine that I don't expect to beat up too badly, I'll give it 4 gigs of RAM. I happen to be on a machine that has 32 gigs, so I've got plenty of room to spare. You can set this as low as a gig and still be able to get through the installation process. So I'm going to go ahead and click Next, and it will ask me what I want to do about creating a virtual hard disk. So I'm going to go ahead and create that right now. And then it'll give me a number of options here. So the VDI is the default format for VirtualBox. But if you want to create a virtual machine that you could import into another virtualization software, say VMware, then you're probably going to want to select this VMDK for your hard disk. Next, it's just going to ask me about how it's going to go about getting the space for the hard disk. Does it grab it all at once or grab it as it needs it? I always go with the dynamically allocated so that I'm not consuming space that isn't actually being used by the virtual machine. Now it's going to want me to actually pick the size of the hard drive that we're going to set aside for this virtual machine. I know that I'm going to want to eventually put a database on this, and as a general rule of thumb, I usually throw about 50 gigs in there so that I don't have to sweat it. I happen to have 4 terabytes of space on this machine, so setting aside 50 gigs is no big deal, and I've told the software to dynamically allocate that space, so I'm not actually going to consume that 52 gigabytes of space right now. So after clicking create, the virtual machine is created, and it's actually going to want me to power it on and install the operating system. Before I do that, I'm going to right click it, go to settings, and in the storage section I'm actually going to point at the ISO file that contains the Linux operating system distribution that I showed you how to download in an earlier video. After I've got that set, I'm just going to say OK, and I'm going to go ahead and start this virtual machine up. So I've clicked start, and you'll see a window pops up from VirtualBox, and it finds that ISO image that's out there and wants to install the operating system. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit enter. To do that, it'll begin to do its thing. I'll close these little notification boxes as they pop up here because I don't really care about those right now. And then I'm just going to let the software do its thing, and it'll actually go by pretty quickly. And now it's saying, hey, I found a disk to do the installation. Do you want me to go ahead and validate this disk? I'm confident in the integrity of the ISO image that it provides, so I'm going to go ahead and skip that step. And now it's going to begin the actual installation of the operating system. And during this process, it's going to ask me a number of questions. So here you see it pops up Oracle Linux. We're going to go ahead and click the next key. It'll ask me some questions about language, and I'm going to go ahead and select US English as the language that I want. We're not actually setting up a machine that has any use in the real world beyond a development machine, so we're just going to use basic storage. And here the operating system software really doesn't know any better whether or not this is a virtual machine or a server. So it's just asking us, hey, I'm going to do some stuff to your hard disk here, and if there's anything that you don't want to lose, then you need to tell me about it now. Now in this case, there's nothing to be overwritten because this will only occupy the space that we've given it within the virtualization software. So it's fine to click yes, discard my data. And then it's going to ask you for a host name for your machine. I like to not go with the default here, so I'm just going to name my host ISQA 8306. And then, the domain name, we're not going to actually associate it with one, so I'll just give it some random domain that I make up. And click next. Now it's going to want me to pick a time zone, so we're in the central time zone, so I'm just going to pick a spot on here that's in the central time zone, and I missed, obviously. North Dakota, that looks like that's got us in the central time zone, so now I can click next. Now it'll want me to give a password for the root user. I'm going to use a very simple one that I can remember and that I often use for all of my development boxes. The operating system will not like the simplicity of this password, but I'm going to tell it to go ahead and shut up about it. And now it's just going to ask me, hey, what type of installation do you want to do here? Again, it doesn't know that this is a virtual machine, so it's saying if I find another Linux system on this machine, I'm going to get rid of it, and I'm going to go ahead and tell it that that's fine. But I am going to click this checkbox down here to review and modify the partitioning layout, and this is talking about how the Linux operating system will actually divide the hard disk that it has available to it. I happen to know that I'm going to want to use this for a database install eventually, and knowing a couple things about how I'm going to install an Oracle database, I'm actually going to want to alter the default file partitioning scheme. So now when I click next, it's going to bring me to a screen that will allow me to edit the default settings for this. So you can see here the overwhelming majority of the space is allocated to the root logical volume. I'm going to go ahead and actually make this a number about 10 gigs here and call that good. And after I resize that volume group, I'm going to have quite a bit more space available to me to create some others. So I'm going to create two logical volumes here. The first one is going to be for where I just put the software I download to install things, and I'm just going to call that inf because I'm lazy. And then I'm going to again throw about 10 gigs out there for this, and I assume that should be enough for the software I'm going to need to move in and out of there. And then the last thing I'm going to do is create a logical volume that will actually be where my database will eventually live. So I'm just going to call that U01, and we will eventually talk about why I'm doing that. And I'm going to let it go ahead and swallow the rest of the space that's available to it. So now that I've done that, I'm going to click the next button, and it is just telling me that it's going to make some changes. I'm not concerned about that. I'll let it write changes to the disk, and now the operating system is actually going to chop up the disk that's available to it in the way that we've told it to. And from here I can go ahead and just keep the default setting. And now it's going to ask me some questions about the type of Linux server I actually want to create. So in a development environment, I'm fond of selecting this desktop version here, and then it's got the Linux server and the Unbreakable Linux kernel. I don't select any of these other repositories for now, but I am going to go ahead and customize this. And again, because I know that I have the intention of eventually throwing a database server on here, I'm going to do something to make my life a lot easier. And you can see I have a number of options that I can select from here that give me all sorts of things I could choose, which will, ultimately affect the type of server that gets created for me. But back here under the servers on the left hand side, there's this servers and system administration tools. And down here I can choose some optional packages. And when I do that, you can see that if I scroll down here, I have the ability to select this Oracle RDBMS server pre-install, and I know that I'm going to eventually want to put a version of 12c on this box. And what this will do is actually create the users and groups and things that I'm going to need to make that database server go when I eventually get it onto the server. So I'm going to go ahead and click that, click close, and then I'm comfortable to move ahead and click next. And at this point, the install is going to go ahead and do what it does. And this will probably take about maybe 10 to 15 minutes to create this.